During my most recent week in the lab, I stumbled upon a dissection I've never done before. There was a piece of rib cage, and it was probably cut at the sides, and it was the whole front, so the sternum, the cartilaginous part, and the bony ribs. So I took it to a table, this piece, and I played around and let it reveal itself to me. And I came across a lot of things. I first started on the inside and cleaned up some muscle that was there and just observed the relationship between the muscles and the tendons of that muscle to the sternum and the cartilage aspect of the ribs and the bony aspect of the ribs. And that kind of started the inquiry. At that point, I shifted my focus from the soft tissue to the bony tissue, which some people call hard tissue, some people call soft tissue, doesn't matter. And I was struck with an observation that is completely contradictory to what we see here. In our minds, we think of cartilage as being softer than bone, less ossified, fewer mineral salts. And what I found was the thickest, densest part of this entire structure was this part, the cartilage part. The ribs were pretty thin relative to what I would assume, based on the skeletal model, would be a softer, more pliable, thinner. The bones, you could break them. The ribs you could break just by hand very easily. But this was really tough. And it was actually thicker and tougher than the sternum itself, than the breastbone itself. So I got curious, and it took a cross-section. So I just cut right through to see what was on the inside. And what I found was that it was very fibrocartilage, similar to the spinal disc, the pubic symphysis, on the inside. But there was a layer on the outside of like cortical bone. So this is actually quite bony. And I did a few cross sections, getting closer and closer to the sternum. And then I also did a cross section of the sternum. And what I saw inside the sternum was definitely bone marrow, trabecular bone, definitely. Well, in the lab, nothing is definite, but when you compare it to what I saw, the cartilage, the fibrocartilage that I saw inside, there was a definite contrast to the eye, let me say it that way. So that got me really curious. This is actually the most resilient part, it felt like. Lots of thick cortical bone, lots of fibrocartilage. This was producing bone marrow, and I learned in the lab from the wonderful Madhav who was leading it that the femur and the sternum, I guess, are some of the only places that continue to produce bone marrow as we get older. I don't know how true that is. I believe him, though. Anyway, so that really caught my attention. And I did these cross sections getting closer and closer to the sternum so that I could see the transition. So it was clearly fibrocartilage, it was clearly bone marrow, and then it was like, shifting its, blending its relationship until it became the other. So that was kind of cool. And then the other thing that I observed was back to the soft tissue, was this immense network of tendony, ligamenty, soft connective tissue that was connecting the sternum to the ribs. And I don't mean like across the open space. I mean like literally just along the bone. So it wasn't like filling a gap. It was just right on top of the bone. So why would we have that? Why would we just have some connective tissue like right on a bone where there's no joint, so to speak? And so I thought a lot about it. This is my world, is force transmission. And so I figured that this structure, the whole thing is a joint. The whole thing is movable and pliable. And when we bend and we rotate, we are in a balance of tension and compression. And the bone part, especially even at the cartilage, the cortical layer of bone, the bone part is resisting the compression, but there's a tensional network all over it that resists the tensional forces. It, to me, was like the anterior longitudinal ligament of the spine. Why do we need an anterior longitudinal ligament of the spine in this compressive structure? Well, because it's suspended in the balance of tension and compression. So I played around with the directions, I removed some of them, I just had a really good afternoon. It was probably 2 or 3 hours. I just sat at my table with my anterior rib cage. Had a lot of aha moments. Join me in the lab, and I will encourage projects like this for you.